Welcome to My Therapist Says, an interactive experience enriching your most important relationships. During today's event, I'll be your host and moderator as we present Taking Control of Your Anxiety. Stress and anxiety, a daily experience for all of us, from parenting challenges to monthly bill payments to taking care of home and work details. Anxiety and stress can put a stranglehold on us during daily activities and relationship interactions. 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 5 is an anchor during these anxiety moments. We demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought to make it obedient to Christ. Dr. David Levy, medical doctor, neurosurgeon, clinical professor of neurosurgery at UCSD School of Medicine, author of a popular book, Gray Matter, and a good friend of mine, is once again with us today as we explore today's important topic of taking control of your anxiety. As a brain doctor, Dr. Levy understands the power of prayer while applying biblical truths to anxiety-producing moments. Today's event takes place before a live audience and live streaming, while offering practical biblical solutions. It's like having your own Christian doctor within the comforts of your living room. I hope you will sit back, relax, and take in these life-changing insights. Please join me now as we connect with a live audience and My Therapist Says. Well, welcome to My Therapist Says. We are so glad that you are here this evening to deal with a very important topic, this topic of anxiety, how to manage it, what to do with it. What does the brain do with it? We have a brain surgeon who is with us, Dr. David Levy, once again. So privileged to have him back with us. You may have seen his information that's listed up on the front as a neurosurgeon. He's also a professor. He is an author and certainly a speaker. The one thing that I so appreciate, even though those are enormously wonderful gifts and years upon years of preparing and training for, that I deeply appreciate his heart, and his heart that is turned toward the Lord. There have been many occasions where I've been on conversation with him just a moment ago. It happened once again, where I was so appreciative of him praying over me and praying for me in a situation that I was facing as we face this evening. So I'm so glad that he's here, and also wanted to be able to suggest also that my understanding is that you are now engaged.
That's correct. That's
Okay.
correct, yes. Thank you. Woman named Naomi, beautiful woman, and just very excited about it.
Thank the Lord. Wonderful. That's just wonderful. So that is awesome. It's way too bad for so many females that were just hoping they might meet him someday and have the opportunity to be in line. So
Thanks, Don.
Sir, so happy for you. Well, as we begin this evening again, if you have that 3x5 card, feel free to raise that in the air. There's a hand right here. And Dr. Levy is going to now present, and then we'll use that as kind of the backbone, the backdrop of what we're going to do for the rest of the evening, your 3x5 card, and perhaps some texting notes that are coming in, questions. We'll be dealing with that. So glad you're here this evening, and we pray in the name of Jesus that you will experience Him, the gift of the Holy Spirit and His presence in your life this evening. Would you join me in welcoming Dr. David Levy?
Thank you. Well, thank you. So anxiety, the number one anxiety, even more than the fear of death, is the fear of public speaking. But I want to tell you a story about anxiety. I was, earlier in my career, working in San Diego, but was offered to take emergency call up in Los Angeles for a week. There was a physician who was going on vacation. They asked me would I cover for him in LA. It was an honor to be asked. And the week was fairly slow, not much happening. And then it was Saturday night, about 6 o'clock, I got the page that a man was having a stroke, and he was in the hospital, and I was needed right away. So I got in the car and started going toward the hospital. I was in Manhattan Beach area, and the hospital was about 20 miles away. And so I went to get on the 405, and the 405 happens to be one of the busiest freeways in the United States. And I really don't like traffic. And I got on the 405, and there was a lot of traffic. And I was a little bit disturbed because I wasn't actually sure if I was going the right direction on the 405. And as I passed one of the exits, since I'm not familiar with Los Angeles, I realized that I was actually going the wrong way on the 405. I was going south towards San Diego when I needed to be going north. So I started getting a little bit anxious. And so I got off at the second exit, got turned around, and was getting back on the 405. And I was so sort of preoccupied with the fact that I was late that I did it again. I got back on going south. And now I am really starting to lose it, right? Your heart starts pounding. You're breathing rapidly, shallowly. I finally got off at the next exit, and I started doing things like, oh, I can't believe you did that. You know how you speak to yourself when you're just really upset and there's not much you can do about it? Oh, you're so stupid. I can't believe. You know, it's interesting just why we do that. I just want to take a pause in the story because you think, why do we do that? Why do we speak to ourselves in a way that we wouldn't allow anyone else to speak to us? It's because it actually feels good. You see, when we exert control, when we make a judgment, when we know the right thing to do, and when we call it out, we get the feeling of control. We actually get a dopamine reward in our brain. It feels good to say, that was stupid. You are stupid. I can't believe you did that, from a position of power and control and knowing the right thing to do, and from the inside knowing exactly what you have done wrong. Now, of course, even though it feels good in the moment, we all know that talking that way to yourself, because you are also on the receiving end of it, ultimately ends up doing you a disservice. So I knew that wasn't the right thing to do, but as I was now finally heading north, but I was 3 exits south of where I had started, and there was a parking lot in front of me in Los Angeles. And I started sort of shaking the steering wheel, and I could feel, my heartbeat in my ears. And like so many of us in that situation, part of the fear, part of the anxiety is I'm thinking, look, there's a guy who needs me up there. But most of us, when we are late for something, we're thinking, what are they going to think of me for being late? How is this going to look? I'm up here as a visitor, coming from small town San Diego to LA to show them what I can do. I can't even find the hospital. And then your mind starts going forward. Well, what are they going to think of me? Well, I don't know. What if I can't get there in time? From the time they call you to the time that you show up, they're recording all of these numbers and times. If this guy's stroke is really bad, I could I could lose my license for this. They may sue me, right? Your mind starts going into all of the bad things that are going to potentially happen while I'm sitting in traffic. And then your mind starts playing games on you. I'll probably lose my medical license. They'll probably take my driver's license. I went the wrong way on the 405. They'll take my license. I'm going to be riding the bus. And so as we go forward into the future, which is the one thing common about anxiety, everything about anxiety has to do with the future. You may have anxiety in the present, but it's about something that then may happen in the future. And I can tell you categorically that when you go to the future, and when I go to the future, God is not there with you. You are picturing a future where you are all alone facing those challenges. And that's why anxiety and worry take such a toll on us. Because we go to a place where God is not. Instead of going there saying, well, God, whatever happens in the future, you are going to be there with me and sort it out. If I lose my medical license or my driver's license, or when I finally get to the hospital. I'll wrap that story up a little bit later, but I want to move into what exactly is anxiety. And I want to read you some definitions, because some people may be listening to us tonight and they're here for someone else, and but anxiety is so pervasive in our culture that I just want to read some of the identifying symptoms. Common symptoms include excessive or senseless worrying. People may comment that you worry too much. A tendency to predict the worst. An excessive fear of being judged or scrutinized by others. Panic attacks. And for those of you who don't know what panic attacks are, it is a sudden episode of intense fear that has no real danger or apparent cause. People often they describe it like they feel like they're having a heart attack, or they feel like they're dying. They cannot get enough air, but there is no apparent cause. Their heart pounds, they get nauseated, dizzy. A tendency to freeze in anxiety-provoking or intense situations. An avoidance of people or places due to a fear that you would have a panic attack or that you would feel anxiety in those places. And actually, this is one of the things that differentiates sort of normal anxiety, like speaking in public or stage fright, from abnormal anxiety. It's called loss of opportunity. You start losing opportunities because you won't go out. Now, most of you that are here have come out, and that probably shows that your level of anxiety is at least controlled to the point that you can be out in public. There are many people, and the internet has helped a lot of people that insist on staying home, but they can share through the live streaming. Any opportunity to be self-conscious, you are self-conscious. You start to avoid and to isolate. You may have symptoms of heightened muscle tension, like headaches, abdominal pain, shoulder pain. Multiple persistent fears or phobias, such as dying or doing something crazy. Dark thoughts that may involve suicidal or homicidal thoughts. Biting fingernails, picking skin. Now, some of the symptoms you may not think of anxiety, but it can be anxiety. People who get upset when things are out of place or things don't go the way they've planned. People with a tendency to be oppositional or argumentative. An intense dislike for change. Tendency to hold grudges. A tendency to hold on to their own opinion and not listen to others, needing to have things done a certain way or you become upset, tendency to say no without first thinking about the question, and periods of forgetfulness or memory problems. I know I have a lot of people that come to see me in the office who complain or are afraid that they have dementia, but when I question them, it is anxiety. And one of the reasons that anxiety does this is that with anxiety, the chemicals that are secreted, there are three parts. The physiologic part of anxiety is the chemistry. Something in the brain called the hypothalamus signals the pituitary gland to then secrete a hormone that goes to the adrenal glands that then secrete adrenaline and cortisol. The adrenaline speeds up your heart. The cortisol does a number of things. It's an immunosuppressive. But cortisol also affects your memory, your ability to remember things. So if you are in chronic stress, that cortisol is actually preventing new memories from forming. So you'll seem more forgetful. Now that can actually work to your advantage in times of stress or traumatic situations where the brain doesn't want to remember it. But so many of us are in chronic stress because stress is really pervasive in our culture. Cortisol also decreases sleep, your ability to sleep. Your cortisol, when it rises and falls, it signals when you get up in the morning. So if cortisol is too high, you may find yourself waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning. There's the physiologic part of anxiety, then there's the cognitive part of anxiety. And that is essentially your anxiety is all about the future. And they've done a study that of all of the things that you worry about, only 8% of them ever happen. 92% of them do not happen. Nonetheless, we spend our time worrying about and figuring out, and it's a soothing mechanism as we worry. And this worry, this anxiety, is a form of meditation. That we go over and over and over it, and we're trying to soothe ourselves by looking for a way in or out or some new angle on the problem or the relationship. But instead of actually soothing us, it just stirs up more anxiety. It actually has the opposite effect. And finally, there are the behavioral aspects of anxiety where we start to avoid things. And that's where it gets into a disorder. If you are avoiding situations in order not to feel anxiety, and you're losing opportunities. There are people who don't go to college because they are afraid of what might happen there. They're losing opportunities. That's when your anxiety needs to be addressed, potentially by a professional. So where does anxiety start? Oftentimes it actually starts in the womb. We can pick up anxiety from our mother. We can certainly pick up anxiety from our parents. The children in the womb are very much affected by the anxiety of the parent, the circulating adrenaline and cortisol in the mother's system. Remember, the baby's getting all of that passed through. The events surrounding the birth, there are a number of things. If the mother is very, very anxious, typically that transfers to the child. In fact, in a lot of these anxiety disorders, there appears to be a strong genetic component as well as environmental component to them. But I want you to think for a moment, if your parents were anxious, and you may think, well, I don't know that they were particularly anxious. But here's a question. Were they joyful? Were they loving? How would you really describe them? Because they may not have seemed overtly anxious to you, but if they lacked joy, that may have translated to you as a child that there was something to worry about, that it's worth being anxious. Now, women have twice the rate of anxiety that men do. And usually the divide happens around puberty. As women start to get their hormonal cycle, they seem to increase in anxiety, and that seems to continue throughout life. I want to spend a few moments now talking about the spiritual aspects of anxiety. Anxiety, being nervous, these are nice words for, I believe, what the Bible calls fear. And the Bible has a lot to say about fear. If you type in the word fear, 300 references will come up in the Bible. If you type in fear not, 142 will come up. So this is really something that, as God tries to communicate with man, he really doesn't want us to fear. He really doesn't want us to have anxiety. He recognizes how serious it is. And one of the reasons that it is so serious is that anxiety really, underneath it, is unbelief. I really don't believe that God is going to take care of me. And I need to stay up at night and worry about how I'm going to take care of myself. So we find in a number of passages, in one of them is Hebrews 3:19, we see the writer of Hebrews talking about the children of Israel not being able to go into the promised land. And he says in verse 19, "So we see that they were unable to enter because of unbelief." So being unable to enter your promised land, being able to move into the destiny that God created you to experience, unbelief and anxiety can keep you out of that. And it's a very serious thing. There is another example as the disciples are in this boat in the storm, and Jesus is sleeping in the boat. They are very, very anxious. They say, they wake him up and say, "Don't you realize we're perishing?" And he calms the storm, and then he says, "Where is your faith?" It seems like in so many situations, he's commenting on the lack of faith, on this unbelief, because he wants them to have faith. Now, it's interesting if you look at Jesus as someone who's training their brains, he's training their minds. The first time he's with them in the boat and they're in a storm, he's there, but he's sleeping. The second time they are in a boat in a storm, he's not there at all. He is expecting them to take what they have learned from that first episode and apply it to the second episode. Now, he comes to them walking on the water, and they are very afraid. But I see that as a metaphor for what God tries to do with us. We are going to go through times, anxious times. And essentially we are to believe, to get it, that I'm with you. I'm not off in the distance. In fact, I believe God enjoys some of these times that we go through because they're opportunities. Sometimes the only opportunity we have to call to him, to talk with him, to ask him for something. Because for many of us who grew up in a family of origin that had a father or a parent who was not approachable, our brains as children wired to that father figure, and we have taken that template and we translated it to God. Oh, I know what you're like. And the brain does that. It tries to help you by taking shortcuts. Oh, I know what you're like. You're just like this. As soon as I get into a jam, you're nowhere to be found. Or if you're there, you're not going to be able to help me. That's my experience of my father. Don't know the system, not able to help me. I'm on my own. And many of us feel that way. And so we grow up keeping God at arm's length. And so when we get into a jam, when we get into a crisis on the freeway or whatever it is where you're just absolutely out of control. I cannot control 20 miles of LA traffic. I need to pray. And so I begin to pray. There I am on the freeway, and I'm remembering from Philippians 4, be anxious for nothing, but in everything with prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. Let your request be made known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Well, it did absolutely nothing for my anxiety. I said, it doesn't work. I had no choice, that I just said, well, I'm just going to keep saying it, because you see, when we have anxiety, it's important to note that your blood is going to this fear center in the center of your brain. That is what is most active. It is not going to the executive control center, your frontal lobes, where it's going to help you be really creative, and also your relational centers. They're going to help you connect with people or connect with God. All of that is shut down, because when you are stressed, when you're in anxiety, the only thing you want is to make the problem go away. Or the person. If the person happens to be a problem, you want to make them go away. So the person or the problem, whatever it takes, you want them to go away. And that's why people start to yell. That's why they scream. That's why there's road rage. We do some crazy things when we have enough anxiety and we insist that the problem go away. But the thing to remember is, when you have all that circulating adrenaline, you are not relational, not with other people and not with God. The other drivers, they are just obstacles in your way. Any person is either an obstacle in your way or a resource you can use to get what you want and get out of your situation, to make the problem go away. Relationships, even to the people close to you, even to the people that are closest to you that you love, they don't really matter. And so I want you to not miss this, that it's very difficult to pray when you're anxious. If you learn anything tonight, you should learn that. It is difficult, not impossible, not something you can't do without training, something you can do with training, but difficult. And so there I am trying to pray. Nothing's happening. Heart's beating just as fast. And I continue to repeat that verse. And then I start to do what I call meditation, which is actually take the verse apart. Be anxious about nothing, but in everything with prayer and supplication. What is supplication? That means asking for what you want. God, I want to get to the hospital soon. Oh, and while you're at it, would you help that guy who's having the stroke before I get there? You know, you actually love him more than I do. So would you take care of that guy? Because I'm obviously unable to help him right now. Could you get this traffic moving as well? And the second part, supplication with thanksgiving. Well, what can I thank God for now? When you are stressed, you are not thankful, because thankfulness and gratitude are relational. And so if you're having trouble with your relationship with God or with another person, one way to start getting that relationship connected again when you're so shut down and overcome with stress and anxiety is to give thanks. And one of the things when I'm stressed, I can't think of anything to give thanks for. So I start with my eyes. God, thank you that I can see. You got to start somewhere. Whatever it is for you, whatever it is that you can give thanks for, on my ears I can hear. And start to move into that. And actually I've got a car to drive. Even though I'm in this traffic, even though I'm in this jam, I'm alive right now. Thank you for that. And as you start giving thanks, it starts building something. And probably more importantly, it's building something here. It's starting to change over your neurochemistry from fear to connection, to love, to joy, to some of these other positive emotions, to say, God, I don't know how you're going to figure this out. You know what? I can just tell you, I'm doing my best. I didn't mean for this to happen. I didn't know. It's the first time I've been in LA with the traffic like this, but I need help right now. And as I began to pray, I could feel myself settle down. Now, it took some time, and that's what I want to impress on you. That when we think about anxiety, we often think about we want something quick. Because remember, I just said, anxiety says make the problem go away. And panic attacks, you want everything to go away. People want to take pills. They want it to go away right away. But so many things about anxiety, you have to change the way your brain thinks about the situation. It's seeing fear. It's going to the future, and God's not there. So you have to argue with it a little bit. You have to work with the mind. I ended up getting to the hospital, and as I walked in to see the patient, I was sort of running in, and the patient was already on the table. And as I examined him, it was clear that his stroke was actually improving, which was a huge relief to me, that he was actually getting better while he was on the table waiting for me. And I ended up not having to do a blood clot removal or anything like that because he actually was getting better and the angiogram looked fine. So one of the things I learned from that episode is, as we said, 92% of the things we worry about never happen. But the toll that it takes on us because of the way that we think about things and how we worry about them can really affect us for days, because once we have an episode of anxiety with this big dump of adrenaline, that actually circulates potentially for several days and affects even our immune system, takes it down a couple of notches for a few days. And so we want to be careful with that. I think I'll stop there, and we'll just go on to some questions, and we'll anyway, thanks for your attention.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, and you're able to put this in such practical ways. I always think of anxiety as anticipatory. We anticipate something that is going to happen in the future, and you're saying that it takes you to the future, and that, in essence, separates us. We feel perhaps the absence of God at that point.
Yes.
And
yes.
So when we look at this idea for just a moment, let's stay on this piece for a moment, that the person has in the biological, if I can go back to this, where you have the hypothalamus triggering and connecting with the pituitary, and I know it's much larger. The brain functions very much together. You're the expert, but then the adrenal and with cortisol, and you have this dump. So this I think you used the word that it goes into your system, and that's when the shallow breathing. Right. At that point, you're becoming very anxious or not able to see things very well. At that point, you said it stays in the system for a couple days. Could we talk about, or for a period of time, could we talk about that for just a moment? What does that do to a human being? Because all of us, we've had that experience. So what takes place the next, say, 24 hours, 48 hours, biologically, for just a moment? Could we stay with that for just a moment?
Sure.
Yes.
Well, I know oftentimes when I'll finish a surgical case, I'll have a lot of circulating adrenaline, and I'll need to actually go home and go for a run. I'll need to get some exercise. Adrenaline, adrenaline is made to be used in your large muscle groups. It is, we call it fight or flight. It's the fight or flight chemical. It's made to allow you to fight or to run to get away. So it's made to be used up in your large muscle groups, your arms, your legs. So as I sit there in surgery moving my fingers, with this adrenaline, I'm not really using it up. It's just sort of circulating around. And so for me to then go for a run and use up maybe not all of it, but some of it does allow me then to sleep better. Certainly I can, there is a price tag for these large anxiety-producing events or traumas that some people experience, and it can be days or weeks until you sleep well. There are some things that can help that, and one of those things is breathing. So I now, when I'm in surgery, I also practice deep breathing and doing some breathing meditations even. So the opposite of the fight or flight response is what's called the pause or plan system. So fight or flight, the sympathetic system, the adrenaline system produces shallow breathing, rapid shallow breathing, sort of clamps down the vessels. The parasympathetic system, this pause or plan system, we have one of those, and many people don't even know that we have a pause and plan system. It is the opposite. The sympathetic has an opposite. It's the parasympathetic. And so as you start to engage this pause and plan system, your frontal lobes, the prefrontal cortex, the area of the brain that has the executive control, that makes good decisions, it's very creative, that starts coming back online. When you are in stress, you are your least creative. So as a surgeon, obviously, if you're very stressed, your creativity is going to become less. Well, you don't want that. You're in a stressful situation. You need some creative ideas. How am I going to do this? I haven't seen this before. So you want that to come to you. Breathing is one way to help. So as you begin to breathe, and that's why for people with panic attacks, they say, well, hold your breath. Because this rapid, shallow breathing only increases the feeling of being out of control. So as you hold your breath, you increase your CO2. If you can breathe out longer than you breathe in, you shift into this parasympathetic pause and plan system. So as I'm doing the trickiest parts of my surgery, I will breathe in for a count of 4, and I will breathe out for a count of 6. So I'll count to 10, and when I get to 4, I'll stop breathing in, and I'll start breathing out, and I'll keep counting to 10. And so as I'm doing that, I'm making sure, first of all, I know there's a stressful bit coming up, and I'm going to get my breathing ready for that. Now, it's not something that you want to do. When you're under stress, remember, you only want to do what you feel like doing, and that's making the problem go away. Doing any kind of new thing is very, very difficult to do under stress, which is where training comes in, which is where these breathing exercises, and we can talk a little bit more about those later. I've got some meditations up on my website that with some breathing, like a breathing primer, and then some different breathing exercises and things that I'm doing to try to help get these principles practiced, little 12-minute or 20-minute breathing meditations to allow you to breathe in and breathe out to actually scripture with a certain count. So,
your website.
Let's drdlevy.com, drdlevy.com, or if you Google my name, you usually can find it.
So one of the things we talked about in the previous session we had about breathing, a simple breathing is you want your abdomen to expand before your chest does, so that your diaphragm flattens And so the best way to know if you're breathing correctly is just put your hand on your abdomen, correct?
That's right.
And see, you want to make sure that's why people hyperventilating, they're going, they're up in their upper chest, and they're keeping the CO2 in. It was what you're saying.
Right.
And that's why you want to breathe longer out than you breathe in. Is that
That's correct? Yeah, if you've ever put their hand on your belly and actually right below your rib cage, and as you take a breath in, your hand should actually come out.
Mm-hmm.
If it goes in, that means you're breathing in your chest. If it comes out, you're belly breathing, and that's what you want to do. Belly breathe also tells your brain you're not in danger. Chest breathing goes along with anxiety and danger. If you change to belly breathing, it just tells your body you're not in danger. You can relax.
We see little babies doing this, don't we, naturally?
Absolutely.
They have not learned this. It's not a skill, but they've not become necessarily anxious, although you mentioned that even in the womb, that child can be anxious. But the tendency is they have a natural way of breathing, so if they're on their back, you naturally see a little baby's abdominal area rise and fall naturally with the diaphragm flattening and allowing for that deep breathing.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yes. So may I just finish this thought, because
Yes.
I think it's a very important one, in that all of us, we find ourselves being in a stress-filled place, and then we come home, maybe we unwind, maybe we eat too much food, or we watch too much TV, or we're trying to say, I kind of want to escape, whatever that might be. Of course, you mentioned that exercise is a great way to de-escalate, to detox, if you're saying. So, and you mentioned that we might not be at our best, and we can actually feel as though we're not remembering things, or we're not thinking clearly. What are some signages? What would tell a person that they're still not detoxing, that they're, other than maybe not being clear with their thinking, or their muscles might be a bit, or some tight, or there's tightening around the jaw, or the neck, or shoulders? What would be other signs that would help us to understand this, Dr. Levy?
Well, I think the irritability is one. That's one of the things that I know. That I noticed in myself. Irritability, certainly, tight muscles, digestion. Your digestion is often the most sensitive to stress. So if you start feeling it in your belly or something about your digestion, interestingly enough, they're finding that there actually is a lot of neural activity in the gut, as well as the heart, that's communicating also with the brain. They even call it like the brain of the gut. There's a lot of things happening there, that we are very emotionally sensitive in our digestion. So I would be looking at those kind of things, but also, in your relationships, if you're noticing that relationships that used to mean a lot to you, you're sort of dismissing people, you're becoming short with people, and the tendency, of course, when you're in that, is to think it's all them. But if you're noticing this is happening with more than one person, it may be that you are actually overwhelmed, and this is such a common thing today, because in our society, we can get overwhelmed and not even know it. But people around you start noticing. When you are physically fatigued, you notice it. You're just so tired you can't go on. But when you are emotionally fatigued, most of us don't notice it. Most of the studies show you don't know it's going to happen. I mean, a mother of a toddler will say, I know I'm going to lose it today, I just don't know when. At some point, it seems to be that we're just blind, or we have no sort of emotional barometer of when we're starting to lose it. I think we can learn those things. I think we can become, as we notice that, if I'm a little angrier in traffic, or I'm shorter with someone, or little things are bothering me that shouldn't be bothering me, or usually don't bother me, it should be a little red light on your dash that goes off to say, okay, you are becoming, you're close to the line, you're getting to the point of overwhelm, and you're going to start making mistakes now. When is the next opportunity that you can rest? Because you need a rest. Now, the problem is that many of us are like that 2-year-old child. We believe the answer is more stimulation. We believe we need another video, we need another movie, we need to go out more, something busy. We don't want to rest because all that adrenaline is not really going to, it's not going to be easy to rest. But what you need is some breathing, and you need to rest, and you need to back off. And I will just throw this out. I believe one of the cures for anxiety, or starting to move in the direction of helping your anxiety, is to take a Sabbath. And that is, most of us take a Sabbath or our day of rest, and we may go to church, we may go, cleaning the house, doing things. If you're not resting, you may be doing some damage you're going to have to pay for later on. So if you're having a problem with anxiety and you are not taking an actual Sabbath where you are not working, you are not doing anything, no TV, no electronics, no brain stimulation, you can take a walk, you can get some exercise, you can talk with some friends, but you're not trying to network with your friends, you're not going to make any money. The Sabbath was for rest, and it's one of the 10 Commandments. Most of us don't realize that God put it there for a reason, because our physical body, especially our mind, needs that rest. And I believe one of the problems with our anxiety is that now with our cell phones, we are so wired, we don't get to rest, even on a Sabbath, even whatever day you choose to do it. I typically take mine Friday night to Saturday night, but often it's because Sunday I'm speaking and it's not really a rest for me. So I really encourage you, whatever, even if you don't want to do 24 hours, if you can do any bit of that without electronics, shut the ringer on your phone off, you get to rest. That is actually, it's a step of faith. It's very hard to do. Once you start trying it, you'll recognize it has something called activation energy. It's going to cost you to do it, and you feel it, because you're going to have faith, and it's actually a spiritual maneuver that God is going to take care of things in your absence if that phone doesn't ring or if you don't hear it. And it's going to be okay if you have to apologize to somebody because you say, I was taking a Sabbath rest. People will respect that. And we somehow get this idea that we have to be always available, and neurosurgeons have that more than most, that we pride ourselves in always being available, and that's not the way you were created.
Yes, there's many people actually here at Skyline Church in this audience who have been reading through the Bible, and we've been this week in Leviticus, and it's showing how to let the land rest, but also for you to rest, and in this sense of periodically give everything a rest, in the sense of that sense of rest. So for you would suggest, because I want to ask you a little bit about nutrition, because that's a question here. Is there a diet and nutritional protocol you would recommend to deal with mitigating anxiety? And so for you, rest is the absence of stimuli, is what I was hearing you say. Is that what you're referring to? I know there's biblical mandates with this. For you as a medical doctor, a Christian medical doctor, of course.
Yes. It is the it's wherever you're used to getting your dopamine. I believe the Sabbath is that you are supposed to give that up, because we just love the stimulation. Dopamine is also joy, and we get a lot of good feelings from that. And I can tell you, when I start my Sabbath, often the first few hours, I get a little bit depressed. I don't want to be depressed. I want to get more stimulation. I walk by my computer, I twitch a bit.
I didn't know neurosurgeons would twitch.
Yeah,
I didn't think they could even do that, so okay.
Figure of speech, okay.
Okay.
But it costs me. And that's when you notice the addiction. Because most of us say, oh, no, I can give it up anytime I want. Well, give it a try. Put that phone down, shut that ringer off, put it on airplane mode, and see what happens to you. And that will give you some indication of how this controls you. What is it? The need to be available. What will someone think if they can't get a hold of me? What will they think of me? what is our motivation for always having to be available? It is, I think we do ourselves a great disservice. So,
thank you. You've answered that. And how about the intake, nutritional intake? What would you suggest that would be helpful for a person to lower that anxiety, to be managing it in a more healthy, fruitful way?
well, I would have to say most people that have anxiety problems also have sugar problems. That we love our sugar. That is just a big part of comforting us. And I think it also feeds this. It feeds it in kids, and it feeds it in adults. So coming off sugar, I used to have ice cream in my freezer for years and years. That's what I would eat before I went to bed. And now I had frozen berries, and now I don't necessarily need anything. So, to wean yourself off sugar takes some steps. To do it all at once is usually too much for people. But gradually, ask yourself, where are you heading? If I can start decreasing my sugar intake, especially processed sugar, that's. I think that is where, if I had to concentrate on anything, that's what I would concentrate on. And also increasing your fruit, vegetable intake. You can replace sugar with healthy fats, with avocados, with olive oil. There are healthy fats out there, nuts. Now, eating a handful of almonds is not the same as a Snickers bar. Everyone knows that. It's not going to have the same punch for you. But the question is, what else can you do to get that little pickup? Also, I'm going to throw out coffee here, because I've got a guy that I'm working with who used to get up in the morning and have a Red Bull right out of bed, and then 2 or 3 cups of coffee and 2 or 3 Cokes in the afternoon, and wondered why he was anxious. And so, the goal here is to get yourself off all medications. Caffeine is a drug, and it's one that many people like, and some people even think it has health benefits. I'm not so sure. And if you're using it to continue to sort of kick your system when your system needs a rest, that may be a problem as well.
Okay, so this adrenaline, cortisol, I'm going to ask one more question, then we're going to move to another question. Actually, this next question asks about how you reconciled with your father. They're asking this question back to your book, if I may. But before we do that, so many of us have these experiences in life where we are overloaded with emotion and then anxiety. In fact, we talk frequently in mental health about some of the research at the University of Washington, Dr. John Gottman, who's helped us to see that when couples are in interaction, they may not see it, but if the resting heartbeat is at 72 for the person and they reach 100, that at that point, then the couple's in trouble because they're not using your word, they're not able to be creative, they're not able to use a lot of rational thought. It becomes very emotion-based. In that particular situation, if we can use that plus what you said earlier, where that adrenaline cortisol dump, I think is what you were saying, which we all have. Other than, say, running or exercise, what are ways that we can detox? What are some ways that you've suggested to your patients that they can detox? Because someone may not be able to go out, say, and run, or even, say, walk. That would be uncomfortable. Maybe they have a back injury or something.
Sure.
That's precluding them from doing so. What would you suggest? So you have an audience, and we have this anxiety. We know what happens, and you've given some very practical applications. What else would you suggest, Dr. Levy?
Well, there's a question I want to ask you. What do you consider play? What do you consider play? And in most adults, it may have sexual connotations, but other than sexual, what would you call play? What do you do that you consider play? And play being defined as you could keep doing it. You don't want to stop. It's not something that you make money doing. and yeah, it gives you joy. So, if you had to think of something, what would you put down? Many of us can't think of anything. For me, I would say reading. I really like to read. And only when I get everything else done do I get to read for pleasure. So that would be something that without exercise that I would say, that's play for me. So what is it for you? To be able to, and if you can't think of it, that would be something to write down, to even pray about, and ask yourself, what is it that I can do that will then restore my soul, will regenerate me when I am overwhelmed, when I realize I've been too over-adrenalized, I'm too involved in this family squabble or this situation at work. I need some decompressed or get out this toxic stuff. That's something that you would need to do. So traveling, bird watching, there's any number of things. But watching movies, I'm a little bit hesitant, and I'll tell you why. Movies have, just by definition, they are, I call it compressed life. And so you're experiencing something that usually happened over quite a long period of time or something very intense, and by definition there's going to have within the first 30 minutes some dramatic episode that is going to increase your adrenaline. And then you're going to watch them sort that out, and you're going to kind of have some highs and lows. I'm not so sure movies are the best way to decompress. We sort of veg out to TVs and movie, but I don't think it's very good for the brain. I don't think it's good for kids. I think nature is very good, and things that are relational are also very good.
It's very interesting. You talk about this idea of play and joy almost in one sentence, or they're one of the same. It's interesting with little children that play is oftentimes their way of communicating. Mm-hmm. So we do play therapy. And you're saying that maybe even as adults, if we have too much anxiety, we may have lost the art of play.
Yes.
Being able to maybe enjoy something we did before. So in many ways, it could be actually an intervention, couldn't it, as well?
Absolutely.
Intervention meaning that just breathing can be that. I have patients that if I help them to focus on breathing, it's not that they forget they're anxious, but their body begins to settle down, and then they're becoming aware that they're less anxious.
Yeah.
So may I shift into this question? You really helped to answer that. I think it's very helpful what you just said, extremely helpful, I would say, because so many people have really lost this art of play, which is so helpful. By the way, for any couple, when the couple is unable to say the last time they had fun or they laughed, that couple typically in therapy is challenged to a great degree.
Yep.
And I will have many patients that are in trouble couples who I'll ask that question, and they really give me that deer in the headlight look. Like, I don't think we've ever had fun together. They kind of look at each other like, when's it? And so actually play and giggling when one is first dating, well, now you're engaged, so you and Naomi may have a lot of giggling, and that I shouldn't go personal here. But anyway, back to this, is that's one of the first things that does take place in a relationship. And when a relationship is in trouble, it's the first thing that leaves, tends to be. So it's very powerful. This next question is related to your book, if we can.
Sure.
I think it's very powerful. The person has asked this question. You dedicated your book to your father. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes. And then how did you reconcile, and how would you describe your relationship following reconciliation, and also the anxiety in the recognition process?
Yeah, a lot of anxiety. I wrote my dad letters for a number of years, very angry with him for what I considered sort of neglect, not feeling valued or cherished or enjoyed by him. Well, I wrote him letters, he never wrote back, so it just made me angrier. And I was on the phone with my mom, talking to her about, mostly complaining about my dad. And she said, "David, you need to forgive your father because you have hurt other people and you need to be forgiven." Well, that's not why I called her, And besides, he should be asking me for forgiveness. What is up with that? I'm the one who, needs help with life now. But that other part about me hurting people and me needing to be forgiven, now that was true. And I want to, first of all, I was able to reconcile with my dad. Ultimately, we see our parents as they're supposed to be perfect. They're supposed to be these God-like figures. As I mentioned, our brain's wired to God through our parents. And when we see that they're not, we judge them. And we have problems with them and with relationships and often with God as well. And so I think part of the reconciliation is being able to say, okay, what part of this problem in our relationship actually is mine? Because it's very easy to see, since he's the parent, where he went wrong, where he is imperfect. But wait a minute. If I look at the way Jesus responded to his Father, he was here to do the will of his Father. That there were things he didn't want to do, his Father wanted him to do, and so he did them. Some very painful things. And he did it because he really loved his Father. Now, I can say that I was not interested in the will of my Father. I was interested in my will. And my father and mother were supposed to pay the bills and help me get my will done. Isn't that the way the deal works? And so I actually, when it came time to mow the lawn, I did the minimum. I look at how Jesus was with his Father, and I look at how I was with my Father, completely different. And so some of us need to go and say, wow, if my father's deceased, and I can write a letter and say, Dad, I didn't treat you with respect. I wrote you off. I judged you. And as we judge people, and one of the things that increases anxiety is unforgiveness, is bitterness, is resentment. If I sit in judgment of someone, Bible says, judge not that you not be judged, right? If I'm judging someone, naturally, it's judging me. Well, what? I can't think of anything that really causes more anxiety than that. I'm actually judging myself as I judge. So as I judge, and it also says, with the measure you measure, it's going to be measured to you. So if I'm measuring all this grief and sadness and bitterness, all this bad talk, gossip to other people, it's going to be measured to me. So that is stressful. So as we act out in our bitterness and resentment and unforgiveness, we are increasing our own anxiety. So forgiveness is a huge part of decreasing your anxiety. If you are living in bitterness and unforgiveness, I can almost promise you your anxiety is higher than it needs to be. So with my father, ultimately, I just said, okay, I started the forgiveness process, and forgiveness is a process. It is rarely a one-time thing where, everything's fine after that. Every 6 months, so often I find something else I need to forgive my dad for. He's been dead for 15 years. But also, in the process, I found things I need to be forgiven for. I was not the kind of son to my father that Jesus was to his Father. And if you were not the kind of son or daughter to your mother or father the way Jesus was to his Father, that would be worth confessing and writing a letter to them or approaching them, because one of the things that helps with anxiety is humility. C.S. Lewis said, humility is the path to joy. If you're prideful and you're arrogant and everything is okay and it's all their fault, that's going to increase your anxiety, because first of all, it's not true. Being humble. I wasn't a perfect child. I'm not a perfect man now. And none of us are perfect. We do the best we can, but we make mistakes, and we need a lot of grace. As we start to forgive and as we start increasing the grace around our families, around our relationships, also the anxiety level starts to drop. Because where there is little grace, there is a lot of anxiety. Oh, I don't want to make a mistake because what's going to happen to me if I do? right? Medical legally, neurosurgeons, very high in lawsuits. There's a lot of tension when we work because of this lack of grace in my field. I understand it. But if you have lack of grace in your family, your anxiety is higher than it needs to be. And you can move into that by giving other people grace, by passing it along, by forgiving, and by helping people be more grace-filled.
So in that forgiveness, we oftentimes have to perhaps say, I'm not sure I have the ability to forgive. Father, you do. Would you forgive through me? Do you have some suggestions about that biblically and therapeutically?
Yes, one of the things, yes, Father, I give you permission to forgive them.
Yes.
Inside of me. I give you permission, help me with my unbelief, help me to forgive. I think so many of us, especially when we've been so deeply wounded in our childhood, we need help to forgive. We actually have never had to do something where we really needed God's help. We are pretty convinced we want to do everything ourselves. It just doesn't, we don't want to have to ask him for anything. But when it comes to forgiving some of these big things, there's no way you can do it yourself. You need to pray, Father, I need your help. Jesus, I need your help. Holy Spirit, I need your help. It's too big for me. I need your help. I want to do this. I need to do it for my health. I need to do it for, it's actually for you. I need to let this go, but I can't do it. Please help. Yeah.
Yes.
That's humility. That's a sign of humility.
Yeah, I was going to say that's humility because that's a position of humility to begin with. We find that in mental hospitals where people who have addictions, it's the ones who actually are able to let some of their defenses down and move into a humility moment that actually tend to get help. As we talk about this, we're going to have to wind down for this evening, and Dr. Levy had expressed to me that he was interested in perhaps our moving into almost a 6-month presentation where he and I would work together at My Therapist Says, like you're here this evening. And we are announcing this evening that Dr. Levy will be back with us August, September, October, November, December, and January of this coming year. Yeah, there you go. That's our response. Thank you. Now, I wish I didn't include my name, and you're not clapping, so it was only for Dr. Levy. I understand that. And so we're so blessed to have you, and this is going to be an incredible next 6 months after we finish out this 6-month series. We do usually schedule for 6 months. It will end June, and then we'll take a month off, but then from August through next January, Lord willing, Dr. Levy will be our main presenter, and we're going to be dealing with some very important topics that I think will be very apropos. You have a way, God has gifted you. I've listened to a lot of people. I'm this age, I've listened to a lot of people and listened carefully to people. You have a way of making very complex issues in a way that we can understand. That makes sense. I hadn't, I can see that makes sense, and we then understand a very complex topic, but yet we have a way of applying it. So when something is said in a way that I can understand, I then have the ability perhaps to try and apply it. So thank you very much, Dr. Levy, for joining us.
It's good to be here.
Again, thank you. Thank you. And thank you all for being here this evening. I do want to mention that we have international speakers that will be with us this next session, and that is Tuesday, April 12th. If you'll notice, it is actually the second Tuesday of the month. We normally are the first Tuesday of every month, and this will be the second Tuesday, and that is April 12th, and that is, you can see that up in front, Reverend Bill and Pam Farrell. You'll find a lot of laughter during that evening. They are hilarious together, and they are a wonderful Christian couple that have been with us before. They've moved out of the city and made special arrangements to come back and to be with us. I think they're caring for a family member and trying to somebody who's ailing. and wanted to move closer to help them. And they speak internationally, so they were able to actually move to another city. But I'm so glad that they're going to be with us. That's Reverend Bill and Pam Farrell. So I hope you'll invite your friends. And also, if you're unable to be here, just note that it is live streamed during this time. It has to be between 6:45 and 8 p.m. on that special event. If you would like to listen to any of these presentations, we're over 100 by now, that in the last 4 years we've had all of them videotaped. And those are available on the Skyline Church website. I hope you'll take note of that if you have someone who would like to listen to this in about 3 to 4 days. I don't want to say it exactly, but within a week, Dr. Levy's presentation will be online so that you might have friends that would like to listen to it. And you can also go to my center, cersandiego.org, and it's also located, all of them are located there for you to listen to. So you'll be able to utilize this. You may have a friend, or you may want to re-listen to this. Listen to it once again, saying, I'd like to hear this portion of it, and maybe have a friend or a loved one sit with you and listen to it. I want to thank our team, John Train. There's a number of people. There are several camera operators. We have BJ in the very back. We have numbers of people. We have the Vicks. We have several people that have helped us and continue to give so much time to these events. So we thank them, the leadership team that have put all this together, and thank them again this evening. So thank you for being, yes, thank you. They have been doing this for years, and they make it all happen. So I'm very thankful for them and this ministry that I don't know of any other ministry that's similar to this, that's ongoing, dealing with these topics from a very strong biblical standpoint. And certainly people are not privileged to have someone of your acuity, Dr. David Levy, joining and helping us both scientifically, behaviorally, emotionally, and most importantly, spiritually. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll close out this evening. Father, we thank you so much for scientists like Dr. David Levy, who has given his life. It's taken years in his life to continue to hone a craft that's very specialized and very needed. And we thank you, Father, for his heart that is so turned toward you. We sense your presence when he speaks, because he's speaking from a heart that is turned towards you. So bless him and bless his life, and continue to bless the work that we're attempting to do here with My Therapist Says, trying to bring very practical issues that have biblical standards and biblical ways of working through these issues, that we can be at peace with you and others, and that we can have the joy-filled life that you've promised and you want for each of us. So we bless you this day. We thank you for your presence that makes all the difference in each and every one of our lives. And I pray this in the name of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen. God bless you. Thank you again for attending this evening.